Linda, and this is Coffee and Crime. This podcast explores real cases involving violence, loss, and the darker side of human nature. Some details may be confronting. Listener discretion is strongly advised. A woman disappears from her home on Sydney northern beaches. No violent crime scene. No blood-soaked room. No screaming witnesses. Just a quiet suburban street near the water. A husband who says that she left voluntarily. And two little girls who would spend decades growing up without their mother. For years, people asked the same question. How does somebody vanish so completely? Because when police began looking closely at the life of Lynette Dawson, they found something deeply unsettling. A marriage collapsing behind closed doors. A teenage schoolgirl pulled into the centre of a family home. And a story that kept changing depending on who was asking the questions. No body has ever been found. But 40 years later, a judge would conclude that Lynette Dawson never started a new life. She never joined a religious group. She never abandoned her children. According to the court, she was murdered by her husband. And for decades, her body was hidden somewhere no one has ever found. The northern beaches of Sydney carried a certain image in the early 1980s. Sunlight, surf clubs, backyard pools. Families who looked perfect from the outside. And in family photographs, the Dawsons looked exactly like that dream. Chris Dawson was athletic, charismatic, and locally known from his rugby league career alongside his identical twin brother, Paul Dawson. Lynette Dawson, born Lynette Sims, appeared quiet, devoted, and deeply committed to her children. They had met as teenagers in the late 1960s. By 1970, they were married and two daughters followed. To outsiders, they looked stable. But long before Lynette disappeared, the marriage had already begun decaying behind closed doors. And people around Lynette described something darker than simple marital problems. They described control, isolation, humiliation, and a woman whose confidence appeared to shrink over time. Years later, evidence heard in court painted a disturbing portrait of the relationship. Witnesses recalled Lynette seeming emotionally worn down, at times fearful, at times desperate to hold her family together. But the deeper investigators looked into the Dawson household, the stranger the situation became. Because by 1981, another person had entered the family's orbit, and she was still a child. At Caroma High School, Chris Dawson worked as a physical education teacher. One of his students was 16-year-old Joanne Curtis. Over time, Joanne became increasingly embedded inside the Dawson household. At first, it appeared explainable. She babysits, she helps around the house, spends time with the family. But eventually the lines between student, employee, and romantic partner began collapsing entirely. Joanne became a live-in presence inside the family home while Lynette was still alive. And people noticed. Friends, neighbours, and relatives. The arrangement disturbed many around them. But perhaps the most confronting part of the story is how openly parts of it occurred. And Lynette's marriage deteriorated. The teenage student appeared to be slowly taking her place inside the home. Then came the 8th of January 1982. It should have been a simple summer morning. The kind of morning that doesn't stay in your memory for long. Warm air is already building over Sydney's northern beaches. The light bouncing off the concrete. The smell of sunscreen and chlorine drifting through open spaces. Families were heading out early. Towels slung over shoulders, eskies packed with food, and kids already restless before they even arrived. And somewhere in that ordinary moment was a plan. A family picnic at a swimming pool. It was exactly the kind of day that you'd expect in a place like this. Nothing special, nothing unusual, just family time. At home, her children were getting ready for what was supposed to be a shared outing. A day where Lynette and the children would meet her mother at the pool. The kind of plan that feels casual when you make it, but becomes important in hindsight. But then Chris arrives with the children. He says Lynette had left the house to return clothing to a shop. He drove her to a bus stop, and that was the last time that he claimed to have seen her. To the outside world, it may have looked like nothing more than a change of plans. People run late all the time. Sydney mornings were busy. A miscommunication wasn't unusual. But inside that space, something didn't sit right. Because the expectation was clear. Lynette was supposed to be there. And she wasn't. The day continued anyway, and that's what makes scenes like this so unsettling in hindsight. The world doesn't pause for a missing person. Children keep playing. Adults keep talking. Food gets eaten. Time keeps moving forward, even when something important is absent. And Lynette's absence wasn't just physical, it was becoming structural. Because every passing hour without her made the explanation harder to hold on to. No phone call, no confirmed delay, no clear reason why she hadn't arrived. Just a growing gap where certainty should have been. By the end of the picnic, nothing had resolved itself. There was no dramatic realisation, no immediate alarm, just the slow, uncomfortable feeling that something in the story didn't quite fit. And that feeling, vague, unspoken, easy to dismiss in the moment, would later become the foundation of everything that followed. Because that was the last day that Lynette Dawson was expected anywhere. After that morning at the pool, she stopped being someone who was simply late. She became someone who was missing. and eventually someone who would never come home again. There were no goodbyes, no indication that she planned to leave her daughters, no discussion of escape. Lynette just vanished from the world. Almost immediately, explanations began appearing. Chris claimed that Lynette had joined a religious group. At other times, he said she needed time away. Some versions of the story suggest that she had phoned after leaving. Others suggested that she no longer wanted contact. But over the years, investigators would identify repeated inconsistencies in those accounts. And perhaps the most haunting detail was this. Lynette Dawson was known as a deeply devoted mother. Friends and relatives could not comprehend the idea that she would abandon her children forever without contact. Especially not without money, without preparation, without a trace. Because real disappearances usually leave fragments behind, a transaction, a passport use, a confirmed sighting, a letter. But Lynette Dawson seemed to simply stop existing. Quick pause here. If you're enjoying these deeper case breakdowns, there's a full extended membership version available through the website. That's where I go beyond the main narrative into structure, timelines, decision points, and the investigative layers that don't always make it into the public cut. It's all linked in the description if you want to go deeper. All right, let's get back into it. Then came the detail that would horrify investigators for decades. Within days of Lynette disappearing, Joanne Curtis, the babysitter, had moved into the Bayview family home. The teenage student was now sleeping inside the house of the missing woman, eating meals there, helping raise Lynette's children, living the life Lynette had lived only days earlier. But even more troubling was the atmosphere surrounding Lynette's disappearance itself. There appeared to be no urgency from Chris, no frantic public appeals, no aggressive search effort. And critically, he did not formally report Lynette missing for weeks. Family members became increasingly convinced that something terrible had happened. But suspicion alone is not enough to prove murder. And without a body, the case drifted into one of the most difficult categories in criminal law, the no-body homicide. Cases where prosecutors must somehow prove death without any physical remains. And for years, authorities believed that they could not do it. The decades that followed became an agonising cycle of hope, frustration, and unanswered questions. Police reopened the case multiple times. Witnesses were interviewed repeatedly. And in 2001, a coronial inquest was held. The coroner concluded that Lynette was likely dead and probably killed by a known person. But still, no charges followed. And this is where cases like Lynette's become disturbing, because life continues around the disappearance. People age, children grow up, houses change owners, entire decades pass. And meanwhile, the missing person remains frozen in time, still 33 years old, still somewhere out there, or somewhere buried. And over the years, public suspicion surrounding Chris Dawson never fully disappeared. The inconsistencies remained. The student relationship remained. The unanswered questions remained. But legally, none of it yet crossed the threshold required for murder. But then, technology changed everything. Not forensic technology, media technology, podcasting. And suddenly, one of Australia's oldest mysteries exploded back into public spotlight. In 2018, journalist Hedley Thomas released the podcast The Teacher's Pet. The series dissected Lynette Dawson's disappearance in extraordinary detail. And the response was immediate. Millions listened. Former witnesses came forward and old memories resurfaced. People who had remained silent for decades suddenly began speaking publicly. The podcast transformed the case from an old Australian mystery into an international obsession. But it also created deep ethical controversy. Could intense media coverage influence future legal proceedings? Could witnesses become contaminated by public narratives? Could someone still receive a fair trial after years of worldwide attention? The legal system became so concerned about prejudice that Australian access to the podcast was restricted during the court proceedings. But regardless of the controversy, the momentum had become unstoppable. Because in December 2018, police arrested Chris Dawson and charged him with murder, more than 36 years after Lynette vanished. The murder trial that followed became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in modern Australian history. But the prosecution faced a staggering challenge. There was still no body, no forensic murder scene, no confession, and no direct eyewitnesses to the killing. The case relied almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, behaviour, patterns, contradictions, and witness testimony. And the argument that Lynette's disappearance simply made no sense if she had left voluntarily. The prosecution alleged Chris Dawson killed his wife to pursue what the court described as an unfettered relationship with Joanne Curtis. The defence maintained there was insufficient evidence to prove murder beyond reasonable doubt. Because of the enormous publicity surrounding the case, the New South Wales Supreme Court ordered a judge-only trial. Justice Ian Harrison would decide the verdict himself. Over weeks of evidence, the court heard about the marriage, the teenage student, the conflicting explanations, the years of silence, and perhaps most devastatingly, the total absence of convincing evidence that Lynette had willingly disappeared. In August 2022, the verdict arrived. Guilty.
Christopher Michael Dawson on the charge that on or about 8 January 1982 at Bayview, you did murder Lynette Dawson. I find you guilty. You may sit down.
Justice Harrison rejected the idea Lynette had voluntarily abandoned her children. He rejected the alleged post-disappearance sightings. He rejected the explanations that had survived for decades. The court concluded Lynette Dawson was dead and that Chris Dawson had killed her. Still, the mystery itself remains incomplete because no one has ever found Lynette's body. No one knows exactly where she was killed, and no one knows where her remains were taken. Somewhere, perhaps still hidden beneath soil or concrete after more than 40 years. And this is the final piece of the story. In many murder cases, families at least receive a body, a funeral, a grave, a place to mourn. But in no body cases, grief becomes distorted because there is no final image, no certainty, only absence. And absence can last forever. For Lynette's family, decades passed without answers. Every rumour mattered. Every reported sighting reopened new wounds. Every failed investigation extended the nightmare. And perhaps that is what makes this case so unsettling. Not just the murder itself, but the ordinary suburban setting surrounding it. No abandoned warehouse, no criminal underworld, just a family home near the beach, children's toys, backyard pools, and the sound of laughter in the air. And hidden beneath that normality, a woman disappeared forever. More than 40 years after Lynette Dawson vanished, one reality still defines the case. Nobody has ever brought her home. No grave, no remains, no final resting place. Only a court judgment concluding that sometime in January 1982, inside the life she trusted most, something catastrophic happened to her. And for decades afterward, the silence swallowed almost everything except suspicion. Because even without a body, the absence Lynette Dawson left behind was too enormous to explain away forever. Not every case finds closure. Not every question gets answered. And sometimes the truth stays buried long after the headlines fade. This has been Coffee and Crime AU. For deeper into the case, visit Coffee and Crime AU online. Until next time.